This episode of the Design Your Dream Home podcast is brought to you by CRAN. CRAN is the Custom Residential Architects Network, and by Porcelanosa. Porcelanosa is a luxury lifestyle brand that brings modern European design into your home. You are listening to the Design Your Dream Home podcast with Doug and Steve. Doug and Steve are architects, and they're here to help you design your dream home. All right, so today we're talking with Kevin Harris. Kevin's firm called Kevin Harris Architect L.L.C. was founded in 1982, and he's located in Baton Rouge, Louisiana. So welcome, Kevin.
Thank you, Doug.
I first met Kevin at the Custom Residential Architects Network, that's CRAN. It was my first symposium in Indianapolis in 2011. I happened to be the keynote speaker at that event, and the evening before, I showed up and they were having cocktails, and I'm standing in the middle of the room, and Kevin and his wife kindly walk up and start talking to me. I'm not sure if Kevin remembers that, but he was the first person I met at CRAN at that event, and I'll never forget it. And they were both very kind and made me feel very comfortable. And of course, I was very nervous because I had talked the next day, but he made me feel at home, and I've known Kevin ever since and seen him at a couple symposiums since then. So let me tell you a little bit about him. First of all, it's a real honor to have him on the show. Kevin is a fellow of the American Institute of Architects, the AIA. He graduated from LSU's architecture program and Harvard's GSD. His firm specializes in residential renovations, new construction, and adaptive reuse. His work has been published in over 50 books and print publications, including the New York Times, Smart Money, Southern Living, and Business Week. He is the author of over 30 articles appearing in local, regional, and national publications. His work has been published in over 50 books and publications, including the New York Times, Smart Money, Southern Living, and Business Week. He taught at Louisiana State University School of Architecture for 10 years. Kevin has also been interviewed on National Public Radio's program, All Things Considered. That's amazing. And he is a frequent lecturer at industry associations, including the American Institute of Architects, Florida Building Materials Association, and Southern Forest Products Association conventions. Kevin also wrote a book published in 2015 called The Forever Home: How to Work with an Architect to Design the Home of Your Dreams. It debuted in June 2015 and immediately became a bestseller and top-rated new release in its categories. Kevin is also the father of three, a sailor, and an Eagle Scout. Wow. So, Kevin, it's great to have you on the show. I always like to ask our guests, first, tell us a little bit about why you became an architect, and then again, a little bit about how you got to where you are now in Baton Rouge. So welcome.
Well, thank you, Doug. Actually, when I was 5 years old, I'm actually one of five boys for my parents. So we grew up with our own little basketball team. At any rate, my dad grew up in New Orleans, and one of his cousins was an architect. I actually worked at Taliesin with Frank Lloyd Wright.
Oh my gosh.
Worked on the Guggenheim Museum, among other of his last projects.
Wow.
And then, when Frank Lloyd Wright died, we called him Uncle Roy, but he was actually my first cousin once removed, I'm told, so genetically. Anyway, he was working his way back to New Orleans and designing projects for different family members so he could build up his portfolio. When I was five, my dad decided that, with five boys, the house needed to be expanded. So Roy came and lived with us. And I didn't realize it at the time, but instead of kindergarten, I was his shadow. I just loved it. I remember him, at five, taking pictures of the house, measuring it. And I was just, we were just thick as thieves during the whole project.
Wow.
It made a huge impression on me. And, every Christmas, my brothers got presents from other people, but I always got something cool from Roy.
Oh my gosh.
And I later realized I should have kept my Lincoln logs. They were designed by Frank Lloyd Wright's son, and Tinker Toys and things like that for construction. things, and of course building blocks. I guess the Freuble blocks.
Yeah.
Anyway, out of the five, I was the only one that was really artistically inclined. Figured I'd be an architect. Whenever Roy and I would get together, we'd just go off and just have a wonderful time together. He was always happy, it seemed. Fast forward, my father decided, since he was a physician, that since my three older brothers did not go into medicine, that I was going to be the doctor. And he wanted me to be the doctor. And I said, well, I'm not really, I'm good at math, I'm good at science, and I can draw, but I don't really want to be a doctor. So I was in high school, and it was time to decide where I was going to go to college and what I was going to study. He wanted me to go to Tulane, of course, and go into medical school. And I said I wanted to be an architect. He said, no, you'd be poor like Uncle Roy. I said, but Uncle Roy is happy. He said, well, look, you're junior in high school. Why don't you go visit him at his house, which I'd never been to, see what it's like. And so one Saturday morning, I drove over to Slidell, which is a city on Lake Pontchartrain, as New Orleans. It's maybe 30 minutes from New Orleans. Pulled up to his address, and it's a pier. And the pier is about almost 2 football fields long out in Lake Pontchartrain. I go walk down the pier, and I knock on the door, and there's just out in the middle of the Lake Pontchartrain, there's this wooden round house. And I thought, oh, that's kind of cool. So I go in. He greets me. He sets up his slide projector. We go through all sorts of slides of Mr. Wright's works and the stuff that Roy had worked on, as well as others, and just had a wonderful time talking about architecture and what he had done in his life. Meanwhile, we're looking around, and we can see nothing but Lake Pontchartrain, and almost 360 degrees. It starts to get dark, and he looks outside, and he says, well, it's getting dark. It's about supper time. Are you hungry? I said, yeah, I'm hungry. And I'm thinking, all right, we're going to go get some great seafood. He stood up and he said, help me move the table. I said, okay. So we moved the table, and he walks over to the cabinet and pulls out a fishing pole and hands it to me. Reaches down on the floor, pulls up a trap door, and he says, let's see what's for supper.
Oh my gosh.
And I went, oh, this is so cool. We talked on, we had dinner, and he cooked it up, and it was just wonderful. So then I drive back to Baton Rouge, and my dad's waiting up for me. He says, okay, well, what did you think? And I told him that story. Yeah. And he said, see, he's so poor, he can't even afford to take you out to dinner. What are you talking about?
It's so funny.
This is great. And I said, Dad, it was so cool. He says, Kevin, he's poor. I said, Dad, he's happy. I want to be happy. What do you do with money if you can't be happy? So my dad said, you're hopeless. Go ahead and sign up for architecture.
Oh, that's great.
So that was my introduction to architecture. And I always wanted to be one. Of course, when I got into my undergraduate at LSU, as you can imagine, my hero of all architects was Frank Lloyd Wright.
Of course.
And then I get into architectural school, and I'm told that, well, he's passé.
Oh, goodness.
What are you talking about? He's got a postage stamp, for heaven's sakes, And so I had started my battles, and some of my design professors discrediting themselves in my own mind. Right. And so I had a healthy or unhealthy battle for 5 years with my design professors, up to and including in my second year, we're asked to design a coffee house on the LSU campus. And the LSU campus is essentially Florentine architecture. This by the architect Theo S. Link. It has clay tile roofs and stucco walls, and so I made something that fit in with the campus.
Yeah.
And the design professor, when I presented my model, took his fist and smashed the sloped roof and said, "It has a sloped roof." And I looked at it and I went, "Well, it doesn't anymore." I had arguments with my professors all the way through, and they really didn't like students arguing with them. So, yeah. But I did well enough to certainly graduate, and then had a good portfolio. So I got into Harvard. 2 weeks into Harvard, Moshe Safdie was our crit.
Oh my goodness!
My first presentation, he makes a comment that I had thrown away 4,000 years of architecture. And I looked at him and I was like, "What?" And he said, "Yes, you cannot not know history, Kevin." And I said, "Well, you want me to study history?" He said, "Absolutely." I said, "Okay." So I, took my drawings and knew I had to start over. So I went downstairs to the library in Gund Hall and asked the librarian, I said, look, Mr. Softy has told me I need to study history. And she sort of frowned and said, well, Gropia sold all our books. So
What?
we don't have anything that predates the 1900s. I said, that's not helpful.
Oh my goodness.
What do I do? And she said, well, the Pusey Library, every graduate school has its own library, just like the GSD. So the Pusey Library, which is manuscripts, they've got a pretty good collection. Why don't you go there? So I immediately, in a panic, run over and find the Pusey Library, which is underground in Harvard Yard, which is kind of cool. But at any rate, so I go down there and I go to the librarian, still in a panic, and say, I've been told I need to study architectural history. And she says, hang on a second. So she goes in the back, grabs this old crickety dude with a crackly voice, and he comes out and he says, it's been a long time since I've seen any of you boys coming in here. So you want to study history? I said, yes, sir. He said, well, have a seat. So I sit down, and he comes back a few minutes later with a cart laden with leather-bound, incredible volumes from the Renaissance, for heaven's sakes.
Oh my goodness.
He pulls them out and slams them on the table and says, here you go. And he starts flipping through them. And then I realized I can't read Greek. I can't read, Italian or Latin and some of the other languages that these books were in. And he was waiting for that. And I said, I can't read these. And he laughed and he said, well, look, you don't have to read with these books. The illustrations tell you the story, and you don't have to worry about not knowing Greek or Italian or Latin because the numbers, they're all in English. Which was, what? And he thought that was funny because the numerical system is, where all the divisions come from. It's a universal language in a sense.
Yeah.
So, and that was his joke for the month, I think. Anyway. So, fast forward, I started studying history, and then 25 years later, at our reunion, we had a dinner with my class, and we had Moshe Safdie come to the dinner, and we're all showing samples of our work, and we all told, 1 minute, 2 minute story about when we were kids in graduate school.
Yeah.
So I told that story about you cannot not know history.
Yeah.
And then I showed my work, and everybody's silent, and they all look at Moshe, and Moshe says, my God, I created a monster.
Oh, I love it, man.
To which we all laughed, and I laughed, and I said, thank you, Moshe. Because what else can he say? He's a dyed-in-the-wool, and he's very good modernist. And you can't have history or culture in his whole cult, if you will, of modernism.
Yeah.
And so we got along fine, but took that as a badge of honor. So
yeah, of course. Yeah, I bet you had no idea. I bet he had no idea he would have such an effect on somebody. So for our listeners, this is the age-old challenge that architects are confronted with, at least today in school. Are you a traditional architect, or do you prefer contemporary work? And so we have these discussions endlessly. And of course, schools have been affected by the people that have taught there, and whether or not they're burning books or they're pulling out old leather-bound volumes and teaching their students precisely what's been taught to people for hundreds of years. So anyway, this is what happens in architecture, and people gravitate to one type of architecture or another. So Kevin, you do traditional work. Have you always been doing that? Have you ever kind of delved into into modern architecture? Had clients that preferred modern work?
I did, and I mean, Motion was an incredible design instructor. All right, and in all honesty, when I went to Harvard, I was, because of this rift and me not understanding the polarity of tradition versus modern, I decided I'd be like one of my uncles and become a wealthy developer. But I'd get into Harvard and under the guise of architecture,
right,
transfer to the business school, and I'd be a millionaire before I was 30. And not be poor like Uncle Roy.
Fishing through his floor.
That's true. So but what happened was, in my dealing with motion, I had gotten a client that wanted to design a house up in the Boston area, in Lincoln, actually. And so I started working on that on the side, which I figured motion would really get upset with me. And at any rate, one day he found the model, and it was a chambered nautilus and floor plan. It was a 5-story house. It got smaller as it got higher. And he admired, he complimented the model. And so I said, whoa, okay, this is interesting. So the house was really a blend between modern and traditional, because it was wood framed, cedar shake shingle roof, passive solar, and it was heated by 5 wooden stoves in the Boston area, and actually it got built.
Oh, wow.
So I fell in love with design, but and I had a very interesting client that was a professor at MIT, and his specialty was light-powered flight.
My gosh.
So back in 1979, he is working on powering rocket ships with solar energy.
Unbelievable.
All right, so I had Luke Skywalker as a client, and incredibly brilliant man, and Lake Mirabeau is his name, and just a fabulous experience. So back when we graduated, we had a party at the house. It hadn't been finished yet, but it was all framed up. Lots of fun. And then after graduate school, I had a fellowship in Edinburgh.
Oh, wow.
I entered the first European passive solar competition, and we got honorable mention, actually. But and so that was all modern stuff. But what I realized in Edinburgh was that it was gorgeous, and they called the new town. It was only 250 years old. They called it the new town.
The new town.
And it was just gorgeous, just fabulous, and well planned. And there was a modern building every now and then that just looked like I don't know, if you see someone with a big smile and one of their teeth has a club of gold, like a pair of poker signs on their teeth. It just looked awful. I just decided that at that point, to hell with any of the objections, I was going to pursue traditional architecture.
Yeah. Wow. A great story. Oh my gosh. This episode of the Design Your Dream Home podcast is brought to you by CRAN. CRAN is the Custom Residential Architects Network. CRAN is the leading resource and voice for architects who focus on collaborative design with homeowners. CRAN provides support, advocacy, and education for custom residential projects, as well as professional development for its members via forums, symposia, publications, and local activities. To learn more about CRAN, visit www.aia.org/CRAN. This episode of the Design Your Dream Home podcast is brought to you by Porcelanosa. With 30 showrooms in the United States and Canada, Porcelanosa is a luxury lifestyle brand that'll make your next project's dream into a reality. From a wide selection of tiles and mosaics to modern bathroom and kitchen cabinetry designs, Porcelanosa makes it easy to bring modern European design elements into your home. Visit porcelanosa-usa.com to learn more.
Can we shift a little bit now to some of the homeowner type questions? We sort of got a good feeling for your expertise. When you're working with a homeowner, what sorts of things, what kind of advice do you give them when you first meet these people? I guess they must find you because they sort of see your work, like your work. What's the conversation like, that first conversation like when you meet a new homeowner, prospective homeowner client?
Well, actually I have instead of charging them, I have a free get acquainted meeting that I want to meet with them to see what they're interested in, and if we're a good fit for me as the architect and them as a client. Because I realized very early in my career that not every project and not every client is right for me, and I'm not right for every client. And school. I guess McKim Mead and White was, get the project, get the project, get the project. That was the most important thing. And I disagree with that. I think it's get the right project. And so I interview the owner, and the owner gets to interview me, and we get to decide if we have things in common, or if we just sort of, the chemistry works. But I ask them about their lifestyle and about what they want the house to represent. And frequently they'll, the husband or the wife will have a photograph that they've copied from the internet of one of my projects. And I say, I just really love this. And so my first question is, thank you. I'm glad you like it. But can I, using your words, not mine, so because most of them aren't really versed in architectural lingo, I said, in your words, can you tell me what it is you like about this house? What it does is it completely goes past what you would think is, here's the shell of the sculpture of the finished house. But what they like about it is some series of aspects, which really, if you take notes on those, it frees you up to design something new just for them. And then I, ask them, about what architectures influence them, or what are they trying to accomplish with their house? One of the red flag, I call them red flag questions, is this your for now house or your forever house? And if it's a for now house, I'm very polite, but it's, how do I get them out of the door? Because if, and I already know that if I wanted to make lots of money and design things, and design less but make more money, I would be a developer. And I have classmates that are developers, and they're doing extremely well. One in California that we were at Harvard together, and he's, at one time, he was the 6th largest housing developer in California.
Wow.
And we went and visited, and we're still good friends. And he showed me his work, and I said, well, can you show me your pro formas, the developer numbers? And he said, yeah. And so he showed them to me. I said, man, this is the same thing we had in school. He said, yeah, it works.
Oh my gosh.
And then he said, well, let me see your work, Kevin. And so I showed him my work, and he said, don't go into development. I said, why not? Because you can't do this stuff in development. You can't do the artistic aspect as a developer. So I decided, well, okay, I want to do the artistic part, so I'll stay as an architect. But with the clients, I'll find out if they, how much they're really willing to spend. And I'll tell them that, okay, one of my jobs is to, one, accept their budget, and that their budget is their business. I'm not going to assume they've got more, or that they can spend more, or borrow more. I'm going to honor that. And I'll let them know from the very beginning, this is how much I think what you have here is going to cost. However, do know that one of my jobs, as I see it, is to introduce you to nicer things, nicer possibilities. And sometimes they don't have a price tag. Sometimes they do. But if they do, it is always your decision to go with the more expensive or not, because this is a learning exercise, designing a house. And so, a lot of times clients come in and they're terrified that, oh, if I go to an architect, there goes my budget. All my money, all my resources are going to go into this house. And I don't want that to happen. And so I, address that is usually their biggest fear. And then as they become, I guess, more and more aware of possibilities and the ones that are important to them, then they free up their budget, do really nice things. But it's not just that they're doing nice things, they're doing nice things that are meaningful to them. You have to build and work throughout the entire project trust with the owner. They know that stuff you advise is in their favor, and that you've got their back. But by the same time, as an architect, once construction starts, right, you've got to you can't take sides. You're required ethically to be in the middle. And so I explained to my clients that I wear 3 hats as an architect. The first hat is as a contractor. They pay me money and I give them drawings and services. Okay, they understand that part, all right? But once construction starts, I wear another hat, which is I am their fiducial agent. I can make decisions on the job site without talking to them, but it's in their best interest for the project. And then the third hat, I am the quasi-judicial role. And if there's any disputes between the contractor and the client, I'm the initial judge. And so I have a lot of clients have a hard time understanding that third part where you have to say, no client, I know you're paying me, but you have to pay more for this because you asked for it, or this is acceptable work. And and I also, another thing I do with my clients is I explain to them the emotions they're going to go through at the very beginning of the project. And the emotions go through all the phases. But essentially, I have this funny chart that they all giggle with, or giggle at. It's in my book, as well as I can hand them a bigger copy of it. And I call it the funk chart. And it's their emotions and throughout a project. And so you've got the owner, the architect, the contractor, the kids, the pets, roaches and mice at the bottom. And as soon as you start the projects, starts from the design, then you bid it, and then you go on through construction. And the client is ecstatic until you get to pricing. And then they go from, I call it, they're manic depressed. So they go from manic at the design to just full out doldrum depression. And it's because they got the price. And I explained it to them. I says, understand, this is what's going to happen. It doesn't matter what the price is. It doesn't matter if the price is within your budget. It becomes more real at that point. Mm. And the closest analogy I can give them is when you go into an art gallery and you see a painting or you see a sculpture and it just speaks to you. And you go, oh man, that would enrich my life. And then you flip over that little 1-inch tag where they have the price, and you get a sting, and it's like, oh my God, this is expensive, but it's really nice. And so you have that little debate with yourself, and you're in depression. But if you decide, yes, I'll pay for it, then that sculpture or that painting becomes part of your life every day.
Yeah.
In your home. So the same thing happens when you read the bid. And then inexplicably, the next day or so, you go from complete depression to back to manic, ecstatic happiness. And then you go on through, and then invariably there's going to be a bill for extras. And boom, you back down again. And then you realize, okay, well, these are justifiable, and they all have to be justifiable. And I ushered them through that. So then you'll get through that phase pretty quick. Then you get towards the end of construction, and you're just tired of construction, and you get depressed again. Now that one's real, because you're worn out. There's just thousands of decisions and so much going on in your head, and it's very expensive, and so you're going to get depressed. But I'm here. You can call me 24 hours a day. You get 3 get out of jail free cards. You can push me out at each of these 3 dips, and I'm going to giggle. All right. And I tell them that, and they laugh and they think about it. And I say, when construction starts, whether or not you use me as your architect, put this on your refrigerator. And when you feel bad and you want to, strangle somebody, ask yourself, all right, where on this chart am I? And if you're just got a bill for extras, don't pull out the shotgun and start, taking out people. It's part of the process, and it's a growing pain. And if you're just tired at the end of construction, talk to your architect and talk through it, get some therapy. It's free from the architect. They don't charge for that, and walk you through it. And so the scary, what I've realized is, with that, the clients, they feel like they know where they are in the process. When you do a road race, or if you're jogging, say you're doing a marathon or something, in Boston, they have what they call Heartbreak Hill. It's towards the end of the marathon. And it's like, you've got this nasty hill to get through before you can go to the finish line. And it's one last challenge. And that's what that third dip is. And although I don't think it's as grueling as the Boston Marathon, but anyway, they giggle about it, and they call me, and I stay in touch with them throughout the projects. And so it manages their expectations and lets them know that it's the only way to get a really custom suit, if you will, if you're a guy or a woman. If you're going to get a custom made dress, the tailor invariably, you're going to get stuck with a pin here and there,
Oh my gosh.
That's the only way to get through the customizing process. And you get an incredible suit or an incredible dress at the end of the process. Or if it's a house, it's your forever home. Now, I also tell them, because of I told you earlier, one of my red flag questions is this your for now home or your forever home? Is that there's a lot of emotions that the owner goes through, as well as expense. There's also a lot of emotions the architect goes through that is part of the creative process. And you can't help but empathize with the client suffering, and you want them to just be happy with the product.
Right.
Well, you've got to go through this with them. And if they understand that, at least theoretically, then you kind of get more and more bonded throughout the project. And which is good for a marketing sense, because they always recommend you and they say, yeah, this is a great, if you're going to do a house, this is the way to do it. But the investment in emotions and money and time, to me, doesn't make sense to go through a custom home design if it's just for now. And so that's my straight up advice to clients. And I've got a bunch of other architects in town that I recommend, for clients that just want something now. And I'm happy to share it with them, because if it's not in the cards that it's going to be their forever home, then I really shouldn't be working on it.
So does that have to do, just back to the for now, forever. So does that have to do with a client's attitude toward what they currently want? That is, do they want it too quickly? They're not willing to invest the time that it really requires. Could you talk just a little bit about that? Because I'm sure our listeners have been there. They want something right away. They want it now. They want it designed. They're used to the television shows.
Okay, well, talking about the television shows, you'd asked me to come up with 3 things I wanted to talk about. That's going to be one of them. But it's unrealistic expectations.
Okay.
Right. There's an investment, and a lot of people are terrified of the unknown when you design a custom home. And so, asking them questions, what do they really want to get out of the house, right? And is it they just want a named architect, and it's a trophy house for bragging rights, not for enjoying necessarily, but for impressing your friends. That's a different motivation than one that actually fits and functions and becomes an asset or to your family, or an heirloom that your family doesn't want to sell. When to give you an example, one of my early clients, when she died, her family got together and they said, okay, we all have nice houses, but Dot's house is so special. We're going to interview special people and make sure they're worthy of this house.
My goodness.
And they involved me in the process, which I was honored and flattered, but it was like, wow, okay. And so they had an A list and a B list, and then they finally sold the house to one of the guys. So
Yeah. Well, it's wonderful to think about architecture having those kinds of qualities that somehow the people that are occupying these spaces need to be worthy of the spaces, and of the architecture, of the details, of the thought that went into it. So talk to us about the things that have been on your mind of late as a professional architect, as it relates to your clients or your business.
Okay, is this my list of 3 things?
Yeah, why don't you talk about what you've got on your mind? Yeah.
Okay, well, one is, of course, we've already talked a little bit about the rift between the architectural profession as it's publicized and the public, the general public, who are our clients. And it's the clients do not understand that there is a ideological battle going on, if you will, between culture, tradition, and modern architecture. And when you ask, and that's one of the reasons why I do houses, is people want the house to represent themselves. It's their sort of a sculpture that they live in that represents and means something to them. And so the more parts of it that can be referential and meaningful, then it becomes a stage for them to point out things to their family and friends that come and visit. It's also something for them to enjoy and remind them of the whole process, and of like a piece of poetry where if you take certain words together, they're just words, but if the right words and the syntax is correct, then it ignites into poetry. And same thing with architecture. If things are, it's not that you have a column, but it's a column that reminds them of something, or a column that means something to them. Same thing with materials. I did a recent house for a client that spends a lot of time in Africa. And so all the wood paneling was African mahogany, which just looks like mahogany. And but it's the fact that it was from Africa and he spends a lot of time there. It's part of his story, when he has friends over and talks about it. It's also beautiful, so as far as this rift, the general public never left culture and tradition. And one of the reasons I came back to Louisiana is one of the strongest things going here is culture and tradition. I mean, there's a festival every week in this state. We get ready, there's a lot of Catholics, so we get ready for, 40 days of fasting in Lent with Mardi Gras. Boy, what a send-off, right? And then 1 week later, well, there's another parade because it's St. Patrick's Day. So much for fasting. All right, we'll eat fish on Friday. We'll eat fish on Fridays, but it's one heck of a seafood boil, So it's we have a good time all year, and it's cultural. And the reason I was being nice to you is just because I'm nice. It's part of my culture. I met you at Grand. So, at any rate, another part is that the educational system in architecture has gotten completely away, just like the story I told you about Gropius. When he was at Harvard, he sold all the architectural treasures, I think, to was it the Avery Library at Columbia University. So they've got a fabulous library there, and some of it came from Harvard. That would never be allowed today, but anyway, it happened. So some schools like Notre Dame are beginning to teach and re-explore tradition and representing tradition. And one of the little points I've learned in my own study of tradition was that when you start getting into classical architecture, you're taught how to do the math and the geometry for a Doric column, a Tuscan column, or an Ionic or Corinthian. And there are all these certain measurements and proportions and column subdivisions, etc. And then I got a book. I started to read books that were used as textbooks back in the Beaux-Arts days, pre-World War II for sure. And one of them is by Vignola, a Frenchman. And he shows this very complicated book. It's a textbook on how to draw all these columns in different styles. But what he says is that, and these are my words, not his, he said, this is just kindergarten. Once you learn to do these things, you need to make them your own and you need to know the rules before you can break the rules, so that when you break them, you do them for a purpose. And it brings, the eye's attention to those clever details or whatever. Then I recently had an instructor we flew in who was actually a Notre Dame student, came in and taught a bunch of architects in Baton Rouge how to draw the Ionic order. And when I was chatting with him, and he shared that in Italy, one of the professors 150 years ago, the first thing he would do with the architectural students is he'd give them the first semester was to go out in Rome and measure columns on 50 different buildings. Oh my gosh. And you say, okay, this is easy. I'm going to measure one. I got it. Then I'll just go repeat it 50 times. And they had to draw the students had to draw the columns as well. When they all came back, it didn't matter how many students were in the studio. Each one had 50 different columns, and they all had different columns. So let's say you had just 10 kids in the class, you had 500 different types of columns. They're all different. How can they all be different if they're all in these very neat little categories? And the answer is they're not in those neat little categories. And there's tremendous, tremendous invention with classical architecture. So
there's a lot to know.
Yeah. And that was his message, the first year for these students, which I think was fabulous. Another issue I have is, back with modern architecture, as a result of it, it's machined, which removes craftsmanship. And so I can't tell you how many craftsmen I have that even sheetrock hangers, when they finish one of my projects, they're happy with it. Even the plumbers, and I tell some of my clients, I said, I'll know that their house is really going to be successful if I show up on a Sunday unannounced and the plumber's there showing his wife what he's working on.
Oh my gosh. Right.
And without those craftsmen, we wouldn't have any buildings. So giving them something that they can show their craft is that's a joy to me, And if it's just square footage by square footage by square footage estimating and construction, there is no joy. You're just a machine. And so I think that I would like to call for architects to put more craftsmanship, require more craftsmanship, handmadeness, if you will, in their projects. And I guess the last part is a question I asked myself, and I thought I had the answer when I was in high school. And it was, what is the purpose of architecture? And the answer I'd come up with was the purpose of architecture was to represent culture. And it seemed to be what it was doing. But when I got into architectural school, and then even when I was teaching, I had lots of fun debates, not just with my professors, but when I was teaching with other professors, especially during design crits. And the purpose of architecture, to me, is to represent culture, not to represent the latest material that's been manufactured, or the latest knuckle connection, or things like that. It's, because there's just so much glass to go around, and it's all over the world. But the craftsmanship is that's why people tour Europe and old cities, just to revel in the handmade celebration of all this craftsmanship. And like it or not, a machine just, you can look at a column that was done by a router, or a CNC router, and then you can look at a column that was carved, and it's more expensive to carve it, but it's just got a lot more life. It's a sculpture,
Yeah. Well, there's an awful lot to talk about here. I loved your mention of an ideological battle, craftsmanship, culture, details, meaning, and architecture. Stephen, I haven't let you ask any questions. Do you have anything before we wrap this up?
Well, I think it's been an hour, so we should probably let our guest go. But no, it's really interesting. I mean, you were on a roll there, so I just didn't want to interrupt you. But a lot of really interesting information. Thank you so much for sharing.
Well, it was my pleasure, and I'm always happy to not only be nice and have a scotch with you, Doug. I'll be happy to continue this discussion.
I look forward to the next time. Thank you very much, Kevin, for joining us. This has been great.
All right,
Kevin.
Thank you.
So we're going to end today's show today by, I just wanted to mention a spam email that I've been getting recently, and I think it's for architects, but I think other professionals are getting it from what I understand. And I was sort of throwing these back to Doug and seeing what he thought about them, because basically it was someone who was posing as a client, a potential client, and then asking a lot of questions, seemingly knowing about who I was, and then saying, how can they get started? Can they send me a retainer? And I said, I don't really take a retainer, without more information. And they go, oh no, we want to pay you. We want to show you we're in good faith, and you take a credit card. And I said, I don't really, but anyway. So the point being that they really wanted to give a retainer to me so that, let's say it was $1,000, and they would overpay by accident, quote unquote, and then ask me to refund the overpay. And so let's say that I fell for all of this, I would refund the, I don't know, let's say $500. They overpaid by $500. Then they would cancel the initial credit card payment to me, and then they would just take my $500. So I thought, well, this is kind of a weird scam, but apparently it's kind of going around with professionals, maybe architects, other professionals. So I just mentioned it because I know architects listen, some others listen, and just be very careful about giving out your credit card information. I mean, people they can find you easily. I mean, Doug and I, we try to be out there, and they know who we are, and they ask questions seeming like they know who you are, and say, oh, I love your project that you did here or there, and love to work with you. And I think, oh, this is a great new potential client. And then they immediately want to pay. And I think, well, I don't really just take payment like that, but maybe somebody who's nice out there would say, okay, let's get started. Here's a payment. And then this person seemingly knows you really well because of everything they learned about you on social media and your websites. That's, oh, I overpaid. I'm so sorry. Can you just send that back? And then you say, oh, sure, I'll send it back to you. And then they disappear. So just caution all professionals out there. If this is a scam that they've seen or have heard of, just be wary. So that's all. That's my public service announcement today, Doug. But I don't know. I kept on getting them, and you kept on saying, I kept on sending to you, say, Doug, what is this? It's like this guy wants to build a dream house, and in fact, he just wants me to give him some money. So.
Yeah. Good information, Stephen. Thank you.
You've been listening to the Design Your Dream Home podcast with Doug and Steve. If you have any questions or want to give us any feedback on the show, feel free to reach us through our website at thedougandsteveshow.com. Thanks for listening, and we'll see you next time.